Policy terms and may vary by situation.
Welcome back to Sikkim 365 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with Max Olson of The Athletic. Brought to you by Pioneer Steel and Pipe, where customer service is their main focus. And best in metal, steel, and pipe for large or small projects. With 2 locations in Waco and Bryan. Family owned and operated since 1943.
So 2nd and 6, back to the ground, Charbonnet. Couple of blockers in front. He explodes in. Touchdown UCLA. Bruins lead for the first time.
Now here's David Smoak, Paul Catalina, and Craig Smoak.
All right, here we go. Max Olson, theathletic.com, Thursdays at 4 o'clock. He's been right smack in the middle of all this. Max, it seems like there has been another flurry of information. Your thoughts about what appears as if the Big 12 is not just a pulse, but they are surviving and also moving forward, and possibly whether it's 12 or 14, but it appears as if, no question, very soon, all but official 12.
Yeah, it looks like wedding day is tomorrow. It looks like they're on schedule for that. And, man, it's amazing. It really is. I mean, I think you just think about even just the last 2 weeks where, you know, the ADs of the remaining 8 schools went to Dallas last Tuesday and Wednesday to meet with Bowlesby. And within 10 days, you're inviting, 4 new members. It's just truly jaw-dropping how fast this stuff all continues to move. And, maybe the fact they went through this in 2016 and they'd kind of done the homework back then, they knew what the consultants thought, all that, maybe that helped make this a little bit more expedited. I'm sure I told y'all before, it seemed like this would be a little bit more deliberate process than just looking at 20 different schools and trying to pick out which ones you like. It was pretty clear which direction this was going by the end of last week. But once again, just truly amazing that this has happened. And look, I think it's a good thing. I'm glad that the stress and anxiety and uncertainty of the future of the Big 12 is not hanging over these 8 members anymore as they try to get through their fall seasons here.
Max, I know this is a huge hypothetical, but we were just talking about this. Had the Big 12 acted proactively, not just when Nebraska and Colorado left, but when A&M and Missouri left as well, instead of trying to sue people to keep them in the league, could maybe they have avoided this altogether?
Well, so in that revisionist history, what do? They take Louisville back then? Who else did they add?
Yeah. Yeah,
who else?
Yeah, that I guess TCU and West Virginia, would maybe have come anyway, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I don't know what moves they were supposed to make going into 2012 that would have prevented the SEC from becoming as great as it's been over this decade. And I just think that if Texas and Oklahoma want to make that move, again, there's nothing the Big 12 really could have done that prevents that makes the Big 12 a better conference than the SEC over this time. It's been a historically just incredibly successful period for that conference and for Greg Sankey. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think certainly in the Big 12, people spent a decade trying to appease Texas and Oklahoma, and look where it got you. So, I mean, I don't know what you could have done, back at the start of the decade to make all this right. But I get the question. I've definitely talked to some people who, and when you look at this round of expansion, do wonder, like, and back in 2011, maybe we should have taken Louisville. Maybe there were other schools we should have looked a little more closely at. But again, from a revenue standpoint, just the gap between some of these Power 5 conferences now, I don't know what you can do to avoid that.
So, Max, what do you think of the new look Big 12 when it becomes official tomorrow? And of course, there's going to perhaps be some crossover with Texas and Oklahoma, all depending on, when people come in and whatnot. But 4 new teams, being above 10 for the first time in forever, regardless of what happens with Texas and Oklahoma. What do you think about the landscape of programs they have?
Yeah, it's certainly the idea of it potentially being a 14-team league in 2023 is certainly interesting. But if I'll talk about it as a 12-team league, assuming those two do leave here at some point. I think it's just a super, super competitive conference. I do think it's still perceived as a Power 5 conference, and none of us can really guess where things end up on the TV side of things in 2025 in terms of the payouts. But I think that you look at that conference and you take Texas and Oklahoma out of the equation. I kind of think nearly any program would have a chance to win a Big 12 title, and I think you'd have a bunch of different programs, playing for conference titles all the time, and having a chance to make a hypothetical 12-team playoff. And so, as long as the Big 12 still has a spot in that, I think it's going to be a pretty pretty darn fun conference to watch. And, look, obviously you don't have like programs that are, recruiting at a top 10 level. So I'm sure people will think that the Big 12, can't have a national championship team because of that. But, I do think that, this is going to become a conference where, you've got to be really good at developing. You've got to be really good at the portal, and you've got to have great coaching. And that's what this conference has been in recent years. And I think it'll keep being that way. And, when you take out the talent gap between Texas, OU, and everybody else, I think it really does kind of level the playing field. And certainly programs like Baylor, we saw it in the peak here not too long ago. Like, you have a chance to kind of take over the conference and be very successful.
Max, is there a chance? Because right now, the way the conference is set, at least what it is now, they're probably, they're third, the SEC and Big Ten when it comes to money, then it's the Big 12, and then there's the ACC and the Pac-12. And, of course, they're going to drop a little bit unless they can come up with better Tier 3 type money or even streaming, whatever else with it. But let's say it's in that neighborhood of $22, $24 million a year after they add the teams, and whatever happens with Texas and Oklahoma, we know they're gone. Can they get themselves back up a notch or two, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's so hard to say today. It really is, and certainly we'll see what kind of payments Texas and Oklahoma would have to make to leave the conference. Obviously, we all, I think all the 8 members all hope that that those are huge sums that are spread out among the schools and all that. But I don't know. I think that's what's kind of crazy about all this is you're sort of leaning on the advice of consultants on what the value of that conference would be. But, who truly knows what Fox or ESPN or others are willing to pay for this in 2025. But obviously the number one priority for these ADs in this conference, beyond having a conference to be in is, remaining whole financially and not having to do, drastic budget cuts here in the years ahead. And look, they wouldn't be making this move if they didn't feel like this would help. They wouldn't be doing this if they thought it would hurt. So certainly curious to hear some of that sort of feedback on this and how much it could help the Big 12 from a value standpoint. But certainly you also, you also can make up some of that money by being really relevant in the college football playoff race. And that right now those conferences, the Power 5 conferences get 50, 60 million from being in the playoff here.
Yep.
So, if you can have a lot of top 25 programs and you can have years when you can get 2 teams into that playoff, I think that's also going to help make up some of the money differences.
Max, do you think that this delays the playoff, the 12-team playoff expansion a little bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the politics of that stuff have gotten certainly really complicated here over the last month or two. And, there's good reporting on our site today from Nicole Auerbach about where things stand there. But it's going to be very interesting to see. You hear it sort of go back and forth depending on who you talk to about. Some people act like it's dead in the water. Some people say, oh, things are kind of coming back around here, that there is hope now for the 12 team. It's certainly more of a question of what year can they get that started and what kind of, opinions do the folks in the alliance have about it and what kind of tweaks do they want. But I'm not going to sit here and say that the 12-team playoff is never going to happen, but that is one of the big issues now. Once we kind of get past realignment, that I think these commissioners certainly are going to get into the ring about.
Max, so what are your thoughts on Ohio State and Oregon this weekend?
Yeah, super interesting first game from Ohio State playing Minnesota, and really a bummer that Minnesota lost Mo Ibrahim because they really seemed like they had a chance there to make that a 4-quarter game. But I think the playmakers from Ohio State, you saw it at receiver, and we've heard about them all offseason, how talented Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and those guys all are. But man, the running backs are really, really good too. So certainly you wonder if their defense, which wasn't great against Minnesota, if they're going to have some struggles with Joe Moorhead's attack. But I think this is a big one for Ohio State to show everybody they are. I don't know that C.J. Stroud and all their players are quite there yet, but I think that this is a team that has a chance certainly to develop into a college football playoff team, and this is certainly one of those weeks to make a statement. And Oregon just wasn't that great against Fresno State, and they, Kayvon Thibodeau's banged up, so not the best timing for Oregon to play them.
Eli Johnson, your story, Eli Johnson and the journeys of college football's 2020 opt-outs. Great story about him. He's from Oxford, Mississippi, and what he's been through. How much fun did you have digging around with this one?
Yeah, great guy. This is a young man who, everyone sort of had to deal with COVID in some way last year. He dealt with it in a real real scary way where his father, David Johnson, great guy who covers Ole Miss for 24/7 Sports, he contracted COVID and actually had to go on a ventilator for 21 days and was in the hospital for nearly 50 days. Miraculously recovered. He wasn't supposed to. They thought he was going to pass away at any moment, and he somehow pulled through. And so really tough year for that family. And then Eli just had some injuries and didn't have a great offseason from being quarantined too much, and decided to opt out last year. And so I talked with him about what that was like. It's certainly for these players, there was a lot of chatter about what does that mean for the sport when guys didn't want to play last year. And I certainly heard it from lots of coaches sort of saying that, those guys don't love football or quitters and stuff like that. And that kind of bothered me. So I wanted to write about, these players that made that decision last year for whatever reason and where they ended up and looked into where the guys that didn't go pro, the ones that returned to college football, about 70% of them ended up having to leave their school. So, which is disappointing to see. So I wanted to write about those guys and kind of where they ended up. And yeah, appreciate you mentioning that one's up on The Athletic this afternoon.
Do you have as much fun, honestly, Max, with these type of stories than all the other stuff when it comes to like the grinding over Texas and OU leaving and what's left over, what happened? Isn't this really more fun? Or not fun, but is it more enjoyable, more satisfying on a story like this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, with all the news that's been going on, it occurred to me I definitely haven't written like a player feature in a couple of months. It feels like, probably back at media days we were doing more of that kind of stuff. But then ever since things hit the fan right after media days, it's just been really relentless. So yeah, it's last weekend was really fun just in terms of having games again. I'm going to Ames this weekend and can't wait to see that game. Should be one of the best non-conference games of the year here, and it is fun to kind of dive back into just slightly normal college football coverage, even though there are so many, issues and newsworthy things we got to keep covering here.
Well, I'm glad to know you're in Ames because I wanted to ask you about that game. That's even better. I mean, obviously last week, Max, Iowa State comes in with the biggest expectations they've ever had. They looked okay, for week one. Yeah. I mean, definitely didn't unleash anything spectacular on offense, a little sloppy on defense, but they won. Iowa, meanwhile, looked really impressive. Iowa's owned this series as of late, but it's in Ames, college game day, all that good stuff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. First, this is the first time in the history of the rivalry that both teams have been ranked, and not to mention they're both top 10 right now. So, really incredible stage, and can't wait to see it. There's so much pressure on Iowa State to finally get it done because Campbell's never beat the Hawkeyes, and you look at the games they've played; they've had a bunch of close ones. But man, Iowa has not turned the ball over in 4 straight games against Iowa State. Like Iowa is just Iowa does Iowa, and that it's really hard to beat. And Iowa State came close last year. I think they were the better not in 2019, I should say. I think they were the better team in 2019 when they played names. But that was just a crazy day, and it didn't go their way. And I think Iowa State will pull it off. I think the difference is the quarterback play, and I just don't know if Spencer Petras is the guy at Iowa. I think that Brock Purdy and his experience, this is the week when that makes a huge difference, I think. But a matchup of great, elite defenses and elite running backs. And man, it's going to be really fun to watch and certainly a tone setter here in terms of what this Big 12 race might look like.
Max, thank you. Appreciate it, buddy. Glad to have you when we can on Thursdays. Again, the story, Eli Johnson, The Journeys of College Football's 2020 Opt-Outs. It's a great story. It's one of the lines, you mentioned this a little bit, his father, David, came incredibly close to dying from COVID-19 last spring. 46 days in the hospital, 21 days in a ventilator, and there's reasons why some of these players, and some of them may have just said, I'm out. But some of them had a pretty good reason for doing that, whether it's entering the transfer portal or being asked sometimes to enter the transfer portal. In this case, they just didn't play. Andrew Billings played at Baylor, Waco High. He was an opt-out, right, in the NFL. And he may be as fresh and focused and maybe back to what maybe he's supposed to be, based on what I'm hearing from him and those who cover.
He's starting. And,
yeah, I know.
And starting on a defensive line that has Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney on it.
Yeah, Clowney's one of those. Boy, I tell you what, he has bounced around quite a bit for what is an incredibly talented and massive human being.
Well, I was interested to hear his thoughts on Iowa State and Iowa. That should be a great game. A lot of emotions riding throughout that one, just with the rivalry and just all that we mentioned. I mean, the expectations for Iowa State this year, the top 10 rankings for both. I'm with them. But Iowa State just hasn't been able to beat them lately. So if they were to get that win this weekend, that would be just incredibly massive for Matt Campbell and company.
Iowa's been good, and they've had their ups and downs, but they've been good for a long, long time. Steady and consistent. They've had some teams that have been even better, and then they've had a couple of times when they've kind of like dipped themselves in a little bit of struggles. But they are solid as a rock. I love the way they play the game. At times you wish maybe they were a little bit more, more urgent. But that's who they are. And quite frankly, I'm not so sure, even though college football has been dominated by up and down and up and down and up and down, that there won't be some sort of a turn in some ways back to that style for teams that can't keep up.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, we'll see. But they've got a great opportunity in front of them, big opportunity in front of them, and I know that they've probably already started cracking open the Busch Lights and pre-gaming 2 days out. But that should be a good one. And the rest of the schedule, Texas and Arkansas, we didn't ask about that, but that'll be a telling game in some ways for both teams. Just kind of see where they are at week 2. Definitely a more loaded schedule last week, though. We had a lot better matchups.
You know why, though, right? Well, no, I don't know why. But it's just the way it can. I thought you were talking about
opening weekend, and they want to get big TV ratings.
Well, because they didn't compete with the NFL either.
Well, yeah.
So you could have more games, put them in more places, including Thursday night, where this is not going to be a night where you want to go up against the Cowboys, Buccaneers, or even the Cardinals and Titans because of how powerful the NFL is. But I loved last week. That was every time I turn around, I get hit with a pretty good game.
Yeah, so looking forward to Ohio State, Oregon. I think the Buckeyes probably run them out by the end of that, but we'll see. It's a noon kickoff, which is interesting, so that's a big game right there at the middle part of the day, and the rest of the top 25 is a little hit or miss, but there's a handful of good games, so can't wait to start watching again, starting we'll have games tonight and all the next few days.
From Chase Seifert, coming from a UC fan, Cincinnati, you'll